What's up guys, it is Starflorge here, and today I am bringing you the warrior tier list for Dragon Age Inquisition. Now first, before we get into this, I need to explain some of the rules I put in place to make this tier list. Firstly, we are comparing just the specs Templar, Reaver and Champion against each other, not against any other classes such as Mage and Rogue. Also, we are assuming you have just gone into any kind of normal warrior build with a two-handed build or a sword and shield build, but also putting into place we are not using combat role, because if we were using combat role, every single spec would just be god tier, and we are trying to make sure we are comparing the specs, not just warrior in general. Also, we are going to be comparing what these specs can do versus general mobs and versus bosses and dragons, and then obviously we are having the early game, which is level 10 to 13, so you've got a few points into your spec. Mid game, which is about 14 to 17, so you nearly have the entire spec kitted out, and then late game, which is 18 plus, and you have the entire spec picked, and then you should be good to go. So let's get into the early game, starting off with the general mobs. We are having the Templar, unfortunately down in tier 2. Basically, this early in the game with only the maximum of 3 points, Templar doesn't really benefit at all in any way. You would be better off taking those 3 points you have and putting them into something like the two-handed tree or the sword and shield tree, as the Templar tree itself doesn't really give you enough benefits, therefore putting it into tier 2. Unfortunately, Templar this game hasn't really been given a good light, and it's really unfortunate because I love the idea of Templar, but unfortunately it's just not that great. Going down to Reaver, however, this is also stuck in tier 2. It is slightly better than Templar, but with the passives not really racking up enough damage together. Once again, the Reaver would be better putting those 3 points into the two-handed tree, and you would get a lot more out of it. However, moving down to the Champion, we are already in the god tier, and the reason for this is you can just already be unkillable. Obviously, early game, all of the specs will be relatively close together in terms of what they can get, as you will have relatively the same damage and relatively the same tank ability. However, Champion, seriously, with 3 points can be already unkillable, which is just absolutely mental. Moving down to the bosses and dragons, we have the exact same layout with all of the exact same explanations for the early game. Basically, Champion will live and the others will die, most likely, and the Champion is just the much better choice this early on in the game. So now moving into the mid game, we have the level 14 to 17. Starting off with general mobs, we are going to straight away tier 1 with Templar, and the reason it's jumped up all the way into tier 1 is you can get the one-shot combo on mobs. Now the reason it's in tier 1 and not crazy god tier is because you can only get this combo once you're at about level 16, 17, so it's still quite a high level build, so you can get the combo, but it's much later on, hence why it is in the tier 1. Moving down to Reaver, again bumped up to tier 1 as you are much better at killing mobs when they're dying or when they are low health. The Reaver will gain enough benefits from all of those passives to really have a huge DPS and damage increase. Now the reason that this isn't in god tier is, once again, you can actually only get all of the best spells in Reaver with the right upgrades once you are level 17, so I'm kind of assuming that mid game it's not that great, because 14 to 16 you won't really be able to get the best combo you possibly can. However, once you can get all of those spells to be able to use Devour Dragon Rage combos, you do get that massive damage spike, which is why it's in tier 1. And then once again, Champion is still in the god tier, and obviously the reason being it just is unkillable. You literally cannot kill a Champion pretty much at this point. It's unkillable and will always be the one standing up. I've had so many times going through Descent DLC content or just content in general, and when your party is dead, your Champion is still living. Now going on to the bosses and dragons, we are going down to the Templar back in tier 2, and the reason is because the combo doesn't really work very well on dragons at all, because it's not massive AoE, and therefore the Templar is back down to tier 2. Reaver stays in tier 1 because all of those passives of low health mobs means bosses and dragons, when they get low health, will ramp the Reaver damage. But once again, when you get that lot later game of level 17, the Reaver damage spike is mental and your DPS and damage will just go through the roof. And then obviously champion once again just staying in god tier simply because you are unkillable, and it is just absolutely mental. Right guys, so now going into the late game of the general mobs, Templar is still in tier 1 literally for the same reasons which was before. You can just get the combo which against general mobs works extremely well, allowing you to nearly one-shot all mobs, and then once you've pulled that combo off you can just finish everything else off. Reaver is now all the way up in god tier because at this point you have your entire spec insane gear and you have all of your other specs to help you out, making Reaver at this point pretty much unkillable with some of the most ridiculous DPS a warrior can pull off. Moving down to the champion, also sat still in god tier because against general mobs, especially in a party, a champion can have every single bit of aggro and live for forever and is just unkillable. As always, it's just gonna be there, you won't die, and as I have said, the champion is always the last one standing if anything goes wrong. Now to the bosses and dragons, the final late game tier list. We are starting off with Templar all the way down to tier 2 again because that combo that you can pull off is only really good against packs of mobs and just general mobs overall, whereas when you come to bosses and dragons it's just not sufficient, and that Templar really won't bring anything else to the table. Moving down to Reaver, however, straight up to god tier, because now as Reaver with the right build you can pretty much be unkillable and then just have the most ridiculous damage ever, and Reaver can rip through bosses and dragons while making sure he just does not die. Now moving to the champion, unfortunately the champion had to move down to tier 1 here, and the reason behind this is simply because the Reaver is so much better in this case of killing the bosses and dragons. Obviously the champion will never die and will always be able to kill the bosses and dragons, and like I said, will usually be the last one alive. But in this case, the Reaver just kills dragons and bosses so much quicker, and with the right build, the fact that the Reaver will not die puts the champion down to tier 1. Because this is a comparison between the specs, champion is just tier 1 compared to the god tier Reaver. So guys, I hope you have enjoyed this tier list and I didn't go through it too fast. I'd like to hear all of your comments below on what you think of this tier list and where you would put each of them in those respective early game, mid game and late game tiers I have put each spec at. Once again, I hope you have enjoyed this video. Hit that like button, share this video, comment below, hit that subscribe button, and I will see you next time.